Balthazar Lorden glanced at the calendar app on his phone and grimaced. October 31st. "Halloween is when the crazies come out," said Balthazar's mentor. He'd been a cop once upon a time. "But they don't bother us here at the bank. The place is closed at night, locked up tighter than a monkey's ass." He patted Balthazar's shoulder before leaving the man alone with his night shift. "You'll be fine." Balthazar had only one experience with a monkey, and at no point had he determined how tight the creature's ass was. It had seemed rude, both to the owner and the monkey, and like as not to get him with more than a few holes in him, which would have been unpleasant when his body hit salt water. No salt water or monkeys here, though. It wasn't even dark. Fluorescent lights remained on, even as the sun set. "It'll be fine," he reassured himself out loud, beginning his lonely rounds of the bank. Nothing will happen. He didn't quite believe it, though. One thing he'd learned over his very eventful life was that everything would happen, and nothing would be fine. You just got through it when it happened and hoped that the rabbit typhoon of the world would give you calm sailing for the night. Electric lights chased the shadows to the corners of the space, silent save for the heating system. "Kind of them to keep things warm," he muttered. He'd have thought it a waste and shaken his head at it. But this was a bank, and in addition to the money it had literal piles of, there were also items in the safe deposit box. Climate control protected these items of great importance, and also kept him reasonably comfortable despite the autumn chill. His flashlight drove away the rest of the shadows, illuminating a decoration on a desk. Apparently, one of the bankers was into the spirit of the holiday. It was realistic, the skin glistening like a real gourd, the eyes almost seeming to glow in the light. A familiar chill ran down Balthazar's spine, and then he turned away. "It's nothing," he mumbled, moving on. This would be his first Halloween at the bank, but also his first solo patrol after a few months of training. He had seen similar posts in his life, but you could never shake the sense that the silence was choking you on that first night on duty alone. Balthazar nearly jumped as the heater kicked in again with a click, reaching for the taser that hung at his hip. As his gaze panned around the bank's floor, he swore that the pumpkin's face was staring at him, facing the opposite direction from before, and that the eyes gleamed at him in the darkness. Balthazar closed his eyes and tried to calm himself. The situation was unchanged when he looked at its leering face again. "It's nothing," he said again. But it couldn't hurt to take a few precautions, could it? Balthazar picked up the gourd and weighed it in his hands. Hollow. Fond but tainted memories of carving these old lanterns with his children came to the fore, and he bit back bitter tears. He grimaced in the mirror of the jack-o'-lantern and carried it out. "It was misplaced. A janitor took it. Management disallowed it. Or," he smiled wanly, "a security guard got too into the spirit of the holiday." He temporarily deactivated the front door alarm and put the gourd outside on the front step of the bank. "There," he murmured, looking out at the night beyond. There were no houses in this area of the city, only businesses, so the night was mostly quiet and still. The decorations in the other windows leered lifelessly at him as he took a deep breath of apple crisp air, then exhaled. A car passed through on nightly business, quiet on the otherwise deserted street. When he strained his ears, Balthazar could hear the joyous cries of children on the city wind. Somewhere, someone was enjoying the holiday. Somewhere, all was well. All was well. Balthazar retreated into the bank, glancing down at the jack-o'-lantern as he did so. It stared at him once more, again facing a different direction from before. Again, glowing where there had once been empty sockets. Balthazar shut the door on it, turned the alarm back on, hoping that the phrase spirit of the holiday was not, how did they say it, too on the nose. He returned to his rounds, resisting the urge to look over his shoulder as he did. He could only resist for so long. However, only an hour of gritted teeth and tensed muscles before he succumbed to the growing sense of dread in his gut. Balthazar looked behind him quickly, seeing only the sleeping metal of the vault and the still hallway beyond. He scoured it visually, but found nothing more, yet the feeling remained even as he turned back to his patrol. His arm clock, it still felt strange to call it a watch, told him he had many hours more to spend in this state of fear, and he was not looking forward to it. Dawn could not come swiftly enough. Once the urge was succumbed to, he found it difficult to resist it again. Every few steps, every turn, he would feel the strange terror. He would look back on dark and empty hallways, checking his watch nervously as time itself became oppressive. But as with all such times, his shift seemed to crawl. He tapped the watch's face, as if that would make its analog hands move faster. He knew that he just had to keep powering through. There were enough security systems here that he had nothing to worry about. If he stopped looking back, the hours would pass. It was just first night blues, nothing more. He'd had 100 first nights now, and he knew the feeling well. He let himself look back one more time down the hall. He could see, just beyond the banker's offices, quiet, under the dimmed fluorescent lights, tastefully decked out in orange and black. Empty and quiet and safe. Balthazar sighed with relief and looked back towards where he had been walking, toward the vault, and jumped. There, on the floor near the vault, was the jack-o'-lantern. It leered up at him, its jagged, grinning maw now dripping with pumpkin guts and seeds, spilling slimy threads onto the floor. Balthazar bit back a scream and kicked out at the jack-o'-lantern, slamming it into the wall. Its eyes still glowed, gleaming mockingly at him. Then he lifted up his foot and stomped down on it. The jack-o'-lantern exploded into pumpkin gore, the lights in its hollows fading as the plant matter rotted away into sludge before his eyes. Laughter echoed in the air around him, and he reached for his belt, only to remember that he had only a baton and a taser to use. What he wouldn't give for a bit of salt right then. It might actually do something. He stalked over to the janitor's closet and got out a few cleaning supplies that looked vaguely usable. "I don't need to do a perfect job," he told himself. "Just clean it up, get it out, try to make it through the night." Balthazar returned to the scene, remembering belatedly that there were cameras on his every move. He glanced up at one of them uneasily. The walls had eyes. Then again, what was he worried about them seeing? Him crushing a pumpkin? Him cleaning up the mess he made? That he was just being responsible. They would also see it potentially coming out of nowhere. Or worse, someone putting the horrible thing there. Or even worse, nothing at all. Balthazar didn't know. He just had to get through the night. He returned to the vault door, ready to clean up his mess. There was no mess. Balthazar carefully set aside the cleaning supplies and hugged himself for a few seconds, holding back the sudden shivers that racked his body. It was not just fear. The air itself had the bite of the autumn winds outside. He could hear the soft hum of the temperature control of the vault, but it remained chilly in all ways. The tips of his fingers began to go numb, and he breathed on them to warm them. their pale white bloodless tips gleaming stark in the silvery cloud of his breath's vapor. Frost, unseasonably cold, began to streak the walls with shimmering silver, and the air lay heavy on Balthazar's shoulders. As he turned to the vault door once more, even the cold, dispassionate gleam of the fluorescent lights began to fade. At first, to a flickering, then to a dim glow, then dying to nothing but darkness. Balthazar clicked on his flashlight, shining its anemic light into the shadowy corners. All the sounds had stopped, and his breath and steps were loud in the cavernous silence. The bankers' desks were unnerving in their normalcy in the now frigid space. A water glass on the counter had frozen over, cracking under the pressure of the ice. He heard a heavy, pneumatic hiss from behind, and Balthazar shone the light at the vault and into a void beyond the thick, cracked open door. The now open door was rimed with frost, but, as though in response to the gleam of his light, a warm glow seemed to linger in the space. Balthazar almost thought he could smell on the stingingly cold air warm, roasting pumpkin seeds. It reminded him of his childhood, crisp treats on a cold night. But that memory, like many others, was marred by grim shadows. Shaking, he brandished the taser, pulled the door open further, revealing more of the light in the vault. A twisted figure loomed over a pile of shining gold bars in a sackcloth bag. The monstrosity was humanoid and made of twisting vines and shadows. The glow came from the head, the grotesque gourd turning towards Balthazar and leering at him in a mockery of plant and artistry. Instead of warmth, the fiery glow emanated a chill that Balthazar reluctantly recognized as the heart-stopping ice of death itself. The being reached for him, and the chill made him reel back all too slow, as a hand wrapped around his arm and pulled him in close.
Well. Here you are again,
the specter said, hand tightening until it became painful, and then, until Balthazar could no longer feel it. He saw, as if in a dream, the hand falling away, sliced from his body. He stared dumbly at the stump, unable to feel it at all as anything other than a loss of heat as the wound gouted blood. The realization struck belatedly, and Balthazar opened his mouth to scream, only to find his tongue pulled taut from his mouth.
Why bother screaming?
The entity said, staring into his eyes with its glowing voids. His tongue was plucked free with a dread and icy numbness, and the taste of hot copper in his mouth.
No one will come. No one has ever come for you, little guardian.
The entity tossed it across the room, splashing the wall with blood, and leaving the tongue limp and wet on the floor.
And no one ever will.
Balthazar almost didn't feel the difference when the grinning beast stabbed into him with its fell vines, cutting deep into his chest. His uniform clotted red with blood as he fell, gurgling. The smell of rot and pumpkin seeds filled his nose as he struggled to breathe. Almost on instinct, he reached for the entity, the gold bars, anything to hold on to and avoid the death he felt coming for him on its swift wings. A heavy gold bar fell onto his chest, crushing what air remained in his lungs.
Give my regards to the ferryman,
the entity said, with saccharine sweetness.
I won't be seeing him anymore.
Balthazar's remaining hand weakly fumbled at the gold bar, frost and blood choking him, as the entity laughed him into a familiar and terrifying darkness. It took, to his addled mind, only a few seconds for the darkness to lighten, and Balthazar soon found himself lying in a dark, damp cavern. It was cool, but not the hellish frost of before. A normal cold for a normal cave. Normal save for the ink-dark water that passed through it. Balthazar stood up and clasped the heavy gold bar to the torn clothing at his chest, staring at the water as it flowed into depths beyond. Nothing in him wanted to enter that river, and he would give anything to stay free and dry of it. It was inevitable. It always was. He could stay on the shore as long as he liked. But eventually he had to step in. It rose to greet him, as if seeking to engulf and devour him with the damp chill. Balthazar strode in deeper, following a remembered and familiar path. Once he had been afraid when the water covered his head, but here, in this place, he did not need to breathe, only to hold on to the gold bar for dear life. The river flowed into darker and darker caverns, but it was the pale granite steps he sought. They were slippery with water, but his footing was sure and careful as he ascended, muscles burning from cold and exertion. He nearly dropped the gold bar, but Balthazar took it slow, eventually emerging onto a bridge that loomed above the flowing, gentle river. Balthazar's eyes sought out a figure in the darkness, soon finding the familiar silhouette, the man on the boat, his shadowed face featureless but expectant. Balthazar knew the choice offered to him, and he knew he could make it. He had free will, after all. He could step free of his bargain at any time and everything, and see what was beyond the bridge and all that he knew. Instead, he offered the boatman the gold bar, arms shaking in exhaustion. The boatman accepted the gold bar, handling it with ease as if it were light as a feather, and nodded. He secured the metal bar in the front of the boat, then offered Balthazar a withered hand. Without hesitation, Balthazar took the hand.
Again,
murmured the boatman. Balthazar woke in the hospital, the heart monitor singing its uncertain tune. He ached, but a sense of soothing relief numbed his pain. When the thought came to him, he took stock of his injuries. As usual, he was largely healed. His hand was intact, his lungs unhindered. In the corner he could see his ID, and it was the same as before. The name, the date of birth, the address, all of which belonged to the Balthazar that had entered the bank that fateful Halloween night. Balthazar could nearly cry with joy. He didn't have to lose time and start over from nothing again. What a wonder. And his mentor officer told him in a visit he would keep his job. The higher-ups, they feel bad, about what happened to you. Looks like the robbers were primed and ready. Not your fault. I put in a good word or two for you, so it's all good. It truly was a great deal, and Balthazar was lucky to have it. However, all great deals came at a cost, especially with the boatmen. It's not like you need your tongue to be a night watchman, said his mentor cheerily. I mean, what are you going to do, shout at them? The man laughed, and Balthazar swallowed with some pain. Yes, a worthwhile price to pay. Once Balthazar could return to work, he did so. He'd never liked it when he was stuck out of work for too long. That was one of the great things about this time. The medicine. The convenience. Sure, guarding other people's money would be unfulfilling to some, but it was the best that Balthazar could do. It was his calling. To protect and serve and the bank was the easiest form of it that he could muster. He felt like a coward, protecting the bank in the day alone. But the bank had decided that a night watchman was more of a liability than a benefit, and left security to the machines. It was, Balthazar decided, probably for the best for the bank. But every day he looked out at the people he served and wondered if it was the best for them. After all, things always happened around him. Balthazar had lost count of the pattern. He would guard something for decent pay. Some thing would always try to reach what he guarded. They would succeed, because he was only human, and kill him. He would return to do it again. Balthazar didn't know the endgame, or what would free him from the constant cycle of failure, aside from making the choice never to return. He did not know that, if he remained in the same time, then it was clear the bank would be struck again, and if he was not careful, there would be death on his hands. It was just something Balthazar had to accept because, as he saw the Halloween decorations sneering at him out of the corner of his eye, he had no choice. When autumn turned to winter, and the new year passed without incident, Balthazar began to relax. He watched the people come in, do their business, and leave. 1,000 small dramas played out in the bank, life-changing and life-destroying both, but ultimately boring for the security guard. His mentor had gone missing in November, leaving him one of only a few guards. Balthazar hoped he would turn up all right eventually, but in the end, he was able to take on all the shifts, and that suited him fine. Better to work, after all, than to think. He walked home from his shift in the cold January evening, deliberately, not looking at the steps of the other apartment complexes. Since the cold weather kept the gourds relatively fresh, people often left their Halloween decorations out until they rotted. January was late in the season for such decorations, but Balthazar kept seeing them, growing mushier by the day in the cold and waning daylight. They seemed to leer brokenly at him whenever he passed. Their numbed, rotting scent seemed to track him in the biting air. But they were ultimately harmless, he reassured himself each time he passed. For now, all was well. He opened the door to his apartment and looked over the Spartan barrenness of it all. He never got attached to the places he lived, never stayed long enough for that to happen. But for a moment he wondered what it would be like to have something nice on his walls. He caught a whiff of rot and wrinkled his nose. Maybe he would clean up the bachelor mess soon. Maybe he would do that on his day off. Maybe he would have a day off. All those dreams died an inglorious death when he felt the cold, numbing chill pierce to his very bones. His eyes fell to the slovenly couch, where a lanky figure sat, cross-legged, its head turned, revealing the glowing, grinning, gore-streaked face of a pumpkin. It stood on spindly, twisted vine legs and loomed over Balthazar.
"Welcome home,"
it said in a sick and sloppy tone, as it wrapped its tendrils around Balthazar's neck. Even if he wasn't chilled to the bone, he didn't stand a chance against the being's incredible strength as it bore him down.
"Do you even know what deal you made?"
it said, as Balthazar struggled, clawing helplessly at the hands that choked him.
"You know it won't stop. The guarding, the hunting, the returning, it's so much more than just coming back. Don't you know that?"
Balthazar gasped, his neck and lungs screaming with several different kinds of pain. The grip on his neck loosened just a little bit, just enough to let a gasp of precious air through before his throat was closed off again.
"We'll always pay off our debts, but you never will. And that's the point,"
it continued, as casual as ever.
Haven't you figured out that the price is always something that you protect? The boatman is making such a lovely raw profit off of you too, always bringing him a little tip and getting nothing for yourself. Well,
Balthazar felt something break inside his throat, a hot pain outmatched by the desperation to breathe around his missing tongue.
I don't feel like letting the others free, so...
The jack-o'-lantern's face glowed with a fell glee.
I'll give you the choice.
One hand left its sinuous grip on Balthazar's neck to reach for his badge, the other pressing in tighter with fingers that became claws.
Yes, this will do,
it said, forcing Balthazar's mouth open and shoving the badge into the cage of teeth and gums.
That should buy you passage. But you aren't going to buy it. You're going to free yourself.
Balthazar squirmed and bled as the claws caressed and punctured the skin of his neck.
You're going to refuse because you, poor soul, you'll never see the things that are precious to you again. You'll just lose and lose and lose.
It laughed and then slashed a razor-sharp claw across his throat. Hot blood soaked into the dingy carpet, and the place that was almost home faded into nothingness. Balthazar could only see, beyond the pain, the jack-o'-lantern thing's laughing features.
Say hi for me.
It laughed, as even that faded away. Balthazar awoke in the cave again. His body was numb with chill, but hurt when he reached into his mouth and pulled the badge free. Drops of blood dribbled from his newly healed cheeks as he strode into the water. As before, breathing the dark water was meaningless, though it stung where it touched his wounded mouth. Moving it around with the tongue was difficult, but possible, and ultimately worthless. Swallowing the water did little to cleanse the tarry despair in his soul. Before him, eventually, was the familiar bridge, the familiar boatman. Balthazar remembered the first time he'd arrived here, his daughter's doll in his hand, and her screams still ringing in his ears. He hadn't had the chance to add his own to the horrible melody. The sword through his neck had seen to that. The boatman had said nothing when he'd met, only reached for the doll. Balthazar had said nothing then, only stupidly given it to him. Only when he stepped on the boat again and woke up in a strange city did Balthazar have any inkling of what it meant. Balthazar approached the figure, who again held out his palm for the toll. Always, each time, he took a thing of value in exchange for Balthazar's life. But what did that mean? He'd thought it was a curse that saw him dying again and again, failing to protect people and treasure alike again and again. But what if it was something more? What if, as the monster had said, that was the price for something else? The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He was a tool to be used, never more than that, and never to be used for long. He was a tool that had to pay for its own maintenance, to an end he couldn't truly understand. He looked down at the badge, his security guard badge. Each time he woke up, he tried to start anew. He gravitated towards jobs that needed a protector, because he was big and strong and able. It appealed to him in ways that nothing else did. Oh, he tried other jobs, but he always found himself protecting something. He would become used to it. He would get by. And then it would all be taken away by brutal monsters in the night. He had worked so hard to get this badge. In this era, a piece of magnet-laced plastic. To be trusted. He always did. And it was always for naught. He mumbled something unintelligible, unable to make words without a tongue. I can be free of this, was what he meant. Free would mean continuing up the river, into the void beyond. But he would be free. He would be lost. Slowly, he stepped up to the boatman.
Again?
The boatman said. Again.